The massive training hall of the Interspecies Military Academy buzzed with activity. Hundreds of cadets from across the galaxy moved with purpose, their different body shapes creating a living mosaic of galactic diversity. Among them walked a single human, noticeably smaller than most others. Specialist Arya Chen kept her head high despite the look she received. At 5'6", she was dwarfed by the 8-foot Vargon warriors with their gray armored skin. The slender, blue-skinned Xylene tacticians glided past her with graceful movements that hinted at their natural telepathic abilities. Four-armed Dranasi, combat engineers worked on holographic machinery with all limbs moving in perfect coordination. And then there was Arya, just a human. She checked her uniform one last time before entering the simulation chamber. Today marked the final test for all senior cadets, and Arya was the first human to ever reach this level. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her brown eyes focused and determined. "Cadets, attention!" The booming voice of Admiral Zorvo silenced the room instantly. The large tentacled officer moved to the center platform, his 6 eyes scanning the assembly. Today you face the Krell simulation. This exercise will test not just your combat skills, but your ability to accept the limitations of warfare. Everyone knew what that meant. The Krell simulation was famous, or rather infamous, for being unwinnable. The Krell Dominion had been at war with the Galactic Alliance for 100 years, and the real conflict had reached the same stalemate that the simulation always ended in. You will be divided into teams, Admiral Zorvo continued. Each team must develop and execute a strategy against the simulated Krell forces. The selection process began immediately. Squad leaders called out names, selecting team members based on species abilities and past performance. Arya stood patiently, waiting for her name to be called. It never was. When all teams were almost full, Admiral Zorvo looked at the remaining cadets. "Commander Drav, your team is 1 member short." The massive Vargon commander's 4 eyes narrowed as they focused on Arya, the last cadet without a team. "The human?" he growled. "What use is a human in real combat?" Admiral Zorvo's tentacles twitched with irritation. "The Academy regulations are clear. All qualified cadets must participate. Specialist Chen graduated top of her class in strategic analysis." "On Earth, perhaps," Commander Drav sneered. "Human strategies are primitive at best." Despite the insult, Arya remained calm. This wasn't the first time she had faced such attitudes, and it likely wouldn't be the last. "Very well," Commander Drav finally said. "The human can observe, nothing more." He turned to his team and added loudly, "We have no use for species that can barely calculate 4-dimensional space, let alone understand true galactic warfare." Laughter rippled through the group. The tallest Vargon, Lieutenant Kor, openly pointed at Arya. "I heard humans still use explosive projectiles as weapons. Perhaps she can throw rocks at the Krell ships." More laughter followed as Arya quietly took her place with the team. A Xylene tactical officer named Mina gave her a small nod. Not exactly friendly, but not openly hostile either. The team moved to their assigned simulation pod, a large, circular room filled with holographic displays and neural interface chairs. Each member took a seat, connecting to the simulation network. "The exercise begins in 1 hour," Commander Drav announced. "We will follow Standard Alliance counteroffensive strategy Delta 9. Sir," one of the Dronasi engineers said, "Delta 9 has been unsuccessful in the last 47 simulations." "It is the approved tactical response," Drav replied firmly. "We need only execute it better than previous teams." Arya listened carefully as the team discussed their approach. The simulation would pit them against a standard Krell battle formation, a complex adaptive system that had defeated the best military minds in the Alliance for a century. While others argued about minor adjustments to the standard approach, Arya accessed the simulation parameters through her neural interface. The Academy allowed all cadets to study the basic structure of the simulation beforehand. Something caught her attention. A pattern in the Krell battle algorithms. Something small but potentially significant. She raised her hand politely, waiting to be acknowledged. "The human wishes to speak," Commander Drav announced with obvious amusement. This should be entertaining. Sir, Arya began, I've noticed a recurring pattern in the Krell communication protocols. Their ships coordinate with quantum lock systems, but the pattern of updates follows a predictable silence. Commander Drav cut her off with a dismissive wave. The Krell use the most advanced quantum networks in the galaxy. Your species barely understands the principles involved. But sir, enough. Drav's voice boomed through the chamber. You are here to observe, nothing more. Your species has barely mastered basic space travel. Leave war to those born for it. The team returned to their planning, ignoring Arya completely. She sat back in her chair, thinking. Don't take it personally, Mina, the Xelian tactician, whispered. The Vargons lost their homeworld to the Krell. They respect only strength. Arya nodded her thanks but remained focused on her discovery. The Krell quantum networks were indeed advanced, beyond anything humans had developed. But that wasn't the whole story. Moving to a corner terminal where she wouldn't disturb the others, Arya began quietly working on a simple program. Humans might not have the most advanced technology, but they had developed along different paths than other species. Where the Vargons focused on strength and the Xylene on mental abilities, humans had always been adaptable problem solvers. The program she created was based on old Earth encryption methods, chaotic systems rather than quantum entanglement. By Alliance standards, it was almost embarrassingly simple, but sometimes simple was better. As the simulation's start time approached, Arya returned to her station. Commander Drav was giving final instructions to the team. The human insists on contributing, he announced, noticing Arya's return. The comment sparked another round of laughter. Perhaps she will throw rocks at the Krell battleships. Lieutenant Kor's laugh was the loudest. Or maybe she'll try to confuse them with her primitive mathematics. Arya said nothing. In 7 minutes they would not be laughing anymore. The countdown began. In 30 seconds they would face the unbeatable Krell simulation. Arya's fingers moved quickly over her interface, ready to deploy her program when the right moment came. The simulation activated. All around them the holographic displays came to life, showing the massive Krell fleet approaching. 100 ships against their defensive force of 20. The war had begun. The holographic displays filled the simulation chamber with the intimidating sight of the Krell battle fleet. 100 warships arranged in their famous spear formation, a deadly adaptive pattern that had broken through Alliance defenses. For a century, Commander Drav immediately began issuing orders. Defensive formation Beta, Dranasi engineers, strengthen forward shields. Xylean tacticians, begin scanning for their command ships. The team moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this scenario countless times, though no one had ever succeeded in defeating it. The Krell's quantum-linked ship network allowed them to adapt faster than any Alliance force could respond. First wave incoming, announced Lieutenant Kor, the tall Vargon who had mocked Arya earlier. Preparing countermeasures. Arya watched as the Alliance ships under their command moved into position. The standard defense strategy was sound in theory. Concentrate firepower on key targets while maintaining a flexible defensive line. But the Krell always adapted too quickly. Sir, Arya said, trying once more. I believe there's a vulnerability in the Krell formation that we could exploit. Their quantum network has a predictable refresh pattern that... Did I not make myself clear, human? Commander Drav didn't even turn to look at her. Focus on your observation duties. This is not the time for primitive tactics. The first wave of Krell ships launched their attack. The simulation was remarkably realistic. Each holographic explosion and damaged ship represented exactly how a real battle would unfold. Within minutes, 3 Alliance ships were disabled. Their attack pattern is shifting, Mina, the Xylean tactical officer, reported. Her blue fingers moved rapidly over her console. They're adapting to our shield configuration. As expected, Commander Drav replied. Implement countermeasure sequence Delta 4. Arya bit her lip, frustrated. The Alliance ships adjusted their formation, but she could already see it wouldn't work. The Krell would adapt again in approximately 40 seconds, based on the pattern she had identified. She turned to her own terminal, away from the main tactical display. While the rest of the team focused on the conventional battle approach, Arya quietly began inputting her algorithm. It wasn't complex by galactic standards. That was its strength. The Krell and Alliance both used highly advanced quantum computing, but humans had developed along different lines. "What are you doing?" Mina had noticed Arya's activity. The Xylean silver eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Just running some analysis," Arya replied quietly. "It won't interfere with operations." Mina hesitated, then nodded slightly before returning to her station. Whether she believed Arya or simply didn't care enough to report her wasn't clear. The battle continued to deteriorate. 7 Alliance ships were now disabled, with only minimal damage to the Krell fleet. Commander Drav was growing frustrated, barking orders with increasing tension in his voice. "Their adaptation rate is increasing," Lieutenant Kor reported. "We can't keep up with their pattern shifts." Arya completed her program, a simple algorithm based on an ancient Earth encryption method called a one-time pad, combined with chaotic interference patterns. In theory, it would introduce just enough noise into the Krell network to disrupt their perfect coordination. The question was how to deploy it. Arya couldn't access the main tactical systems without Commander Drav's authorization. She would have to find another way. She noticed that her terminal had access to the communications array, a system used to send simulated messages between Alliance ships. It wasn't meant for offensive operations, but it could transmit data packets. "Second wave incoming," Lieutenant Kor announced. "We've lost 9 ships, shields failing on 3 more." The mood in the simulation chamber was growing tense. This scenario always ended the same way: total defeat for the Alliance forces. The exercise was designed to teach cadets that some enemies could not be defeated through conventional means. But Arya wasn't thinking conventionally. While the rest of the team focused on the main battle, she quietly uploaded her program to the communications array. Instead of sending standard message packets between ships, she modified the system to broadcast her chaotic algorithm directly toward the Krell fleet. In a real battle, this would be done using specialized transmitter drones, but for the simulation, the communications array would suffice. The program would enter the Krell network through their own communication channels. They wouldn't detect it because they weren't looking for something so simple. "Sir, we're down to 7 functional ships," one of the Dronasi engineers reported. "Standard procedure would be to retreat at this point." Commander Drav's 4 eyes narrowed in frustration. "No retreat. Continue the attack pattern." Arya glanced at the mission timer. They were 3 minutes into the simulation. If her theory was correct, her program should begin showing effects soon. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Krell ships continued their relentless advance, destroying another Alliance vessel. Commander Drav was issuing increasingly desperate orders, trying tactics that had failed countless times before. Then Arya noticed it, a slight hesitation in one of the Krell ships. Its movement pattern broke formation for just a second before rejoining the attack. "Did you see that?" she whispered to herself. A moment later, it happened again. 2 Krell ships on the far edge of their formation fired their weapons a fraction of a second out of sync. Mina noticed it too. The Xylene's telepathic abilities made her especially sensitive to patterns. "Something's wrong with the Krell ships," she said, confusion in her voice. "What do you mean wrong?" Commander Drav demanded. "Their coordination is faltering," Mina replied, studying her display. "It's subtle, but their attack pattern is becoming less precise." As they watched, the effect spread. More Krell ships began showing signs of communication problems. Some fired too early, others too late. Their perfect formation started to show small gaps. "What's happening?" Lieutenant Kor asked, his earlier mockery replaced by confusion. "The Krell never make formation errors." Commander Drav turned to his team. "Who did this? Is someone interfering with the simulation parameters?" No one answered. Arya kept her eyes on her display, monitoring the spread of her program through the simulated Krell network. It was working even better than she had expected. The chaotic interference was cascading through their quantum-linked ships, creating increasing levels of disorganization. 5 minutes into the simulation, the Krell fleet was showing obvious signs of disarray. Ships that should have been firing in perfect sequence were now completely out of sync. Some were even moving in the wrong direction. "I don't understand," Commander Drav said, watching the unprecedented scenario unfold. "This is not how the simulation is programmed to run." "Sir," Mina said, her silver eyes wide with realization as she looked at Arya. I think the human did something." All eyes turned to Arya, who was still quietly monitoring her programs. "Progress. Explain yourself, Specialist Chen," Commander Drav demanded. Arya looked up at her team, who had been laughing at her just minutes ago. 7 minutes, she said calmly. "That's all it took. What have you done?" Commander Drav's voice was a mixture of anger and disbelief as he towered over Arya. The simulation chamber had fallen silent, all eyes focused on the human cadet. "I introduced a simple chaos algorithm into their communication network," Arya explained calmly. "It doesn't attack their quantum systems directly, it just adds random noise that multiplies through their perfect coordination." On the main display, the Krell fleet was in complete disarray. Ships collided with each other, weapons fired at empty space, and defensive shields activated randomly. The perfect war machine had transformed into chaos in just 7 minutes. "Impossible," Lieutenant Kor muttered. "The Krell network is impenetrable. Our best Xylene hackers and Dronazi engineers have tried for decades." "That's the problem," Arya said, standing up from her station. "Everyone has been trying to beat the Krell with advanced technology, but their quantum network has no defense against simpler chaotic systems." She walked to the main tactical display and pointed to the Krell ships. "The Krell rely on perfect information flow between ships. Their quantum encryption is unbreakable by conventional means, but it's vulnerable to noise." "You're saying you defeated them with primitive technology?" Mina asked, her silver eyes wide with surprise. Arya nodded. "Humans developed along different lines than most galactic species. We didn't discover quantum communication until recently. Instead, we focused on cryptography based on chaos theory and random number generation." The simulation continued running. By now, the Krell fleet was completely ineffective. Alliance ships, which had been on the verge of defeat, were easily picking off the disorganized enemy vessels. "This must be a malfunction in the simulation," Commander Drav insisted, though doubt was creeping into his voice. "No one has ever defeated the Krell scenario." The doors to the simulation chamber slid open with a hiss. Admiral Zorvo entered, his tentacles twitching with agitation. Behind him walked 3 senior academy instructors, all looking equally shocked. "What is happening here?" the Admiral demanded. "The simulation parameters show unprecedented results. Who is responsible for this?" Commander Drav hesitated, then reluctantly pointed to Arya. "The human cadet claims to have disrupted the Krell communication network." Admiral Zorvo's 6 eyes blinked in succession, a sign of extreme surprise in his species. "Explain, Specialist." "Chen." Arya stood at attention. "Sir, I identified a vulnerability in the Krell quantum network. While their encryption cannot be broken by conventional computing, it has no defense against chaotic interference patterns. I created a simple algorithm that introduces random noise into their communications." "Show me," the Admiral ordered. Arya returned to her terminal and displayed her program on the main screen. The code was surprisingly short and simple compared to most military software. Many of the alien cadets looked confused by its basic structure. One of the instructors, a senior Dronazi engineer, examined the code carefully. "This is remarkably simple," he said finally, "but I see the principle. Instead of trying to decrypt their communications, it simply makes communication unreliable, brilliant in its simplicity." "Can this work against the actual Krell?" Admiral Zorvo asked directly. The Dronazi instructor's forearms made complex gestures as he thought. "In theory, yes, the simulation accurately models Krell communication networks. If it works here, a similar approach could work in reality. That's impossible, Commander Drav interrupted. The Krell have defeated our best strategies for 100 years. How could something so simple work when our most advanced technology has failed? Sometimes the simplest solutions are the hardest to see, Mina said quietly. The Xylian tactician had been studying Arya's program with growing appreciation. We've been thinking like ourselves. We never considered a human approach. Admiral. Zorvo turned all 6 eyes to Arya. 7 minutes, he said, repeating her earlier words. You defeated the undefeatable enemy in 7 minutes. The simulation concluded, displaying the final results on the main screen. Krell fleet, 100% destroyed or disabled Alliance fleet, 58% remaining. Below these figures, large red letters flashed. Simulation complete. Alliance victory. This has never happened before, one of the instructors whispered. The Admiral's tentacles coiled thoughtfully. Specialist Chen, you will come with me immediately. The Strategic Command must see this. He turned to the rest of the cadets. The simulation exercise is suspended for all other teams. What has happened here changes everything. As Arya prepared to leave with the Admiral, Lieutenant Kor approached her. The tall Vargon, who had mocked her earlier, now looked at her with a mixture of confusion and reluctant respect. I don't understand, he said. How did you see what our best military minds missed for a century? Arya smiled slightly. Humans have a saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The Alliance has been using the most advanced quantum hammers in the galaxy, but sometimes you need a different tool entirely. Commander Drav stood by the door, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as he processed what had happened. The human cadet has humbled me, he admitted as Arya passed. I will not make the same mistake again. Admiral Zorvo led Arya through the Academy's grand hallways. Cadets and instructors stopped and stared as they passed. News was already spreading about what had happened in the simulation chamber. Do you understand what you've done today, Specialist Chen? The Admiral asked as they walked. I solved a simulation, sir, Arya replied modestly. The Admiral's tentacles rippled with what might have been laughter. You've done far more than that. You may have just changed the course of a 100-year war. He paused before a massive door marked Strategic Command. The real Krell fleet is attacking Centauri outpost as we speak. 16 billion Alliance. Citizens are in danger. Arya's eyes widened. My algorithm that you think it could work in a real battle? We're about to find out, Admiral Zorvo said gravely. If you're correct, you may have just saved billions of lives. He placed one tentacle on the security scanner, and the massive doors began to open. 7 minutes to change a century of war, the Admiral murmured. Prepare yourself, Specialist Chen. Your real test begins now. The Strategic Command Center of the Interspecies Military Academy was massive. Holographic displays covered the walls, showing real-time battle data from across the galaxy. Officers from dozens of species worked at stations, monitoring the ongoing war against the Krell Dominion. Arya had never seen anything like it. As a cadet, she hadn't been allowed access to this level of the Academy. Now she stood in the center of galactic military operations, all because of a simple algorithm she had created. Admiral Zorvo led her to a large, circular table where several high-ranking officers waited. Their uniforms displayed insignias that Arya had only seen in textbooks. Generals, Admirals, Zorvo announced. This is Specialist Arya Chen. She has just accomplished what we believed impossible. A tall, silver-skinned Xylian general stood up. This is the human cadet? The one who defeated the Krell simulation? Yes, General Talos, Admiral Zorvo confirmed. Specialist Chen, please explain your solution to the Strategic Command. Arya took a deep breath. Just hours ago, she had been ignored and mocked by her teammates. Now the highest-ranking military leaders in the Alliance were waiting for her explanation. The Krell use quantum-entangled communication networks, she began, keeping her explanation simple. For a century, we've tried to defeat this system by developing more advanced quantum computers. But this approach can never succeed because their encryption is theoretically unbreakable. She moved to a nearby display and connected her datapad, showing her algorithm. Instead of trying to break their encryption, I created a program that introduces chaotic noise patterns into their network. The Krell systems are designed for perfect clarity. They have no defense against random interference because they've never needed one. General Talos studied the display, his silver eyes narrowing. So simple, he murmured, and yet we never considered it. Humans developed different methods of encryption before discovering quantum physics, Arya explained. We relied on chaos theory and random number generation, approaches that seem primitive by current galactic standards. But sometimes older methods have advantages that newer technology overlooks. A Dranasi admiral with 4 mechanical arms folded across his chest spoke next. The simulation is one thing. Real battle is another. The Krell have adaptive systems that might recognize and counter such an attack. That's true, Admiral Zex, Arya acknowledged. But my analysis suggests they would need approximately 12 minutes to identify the source of interference and adapt. By then, their fleet coordination would already be compromised. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. A century of stalemate might be broken by this simple approach. The Centauri outpost situation is critical, Admiral Zorvo reminded everyone. We have less than 6 hours before the Krell fleet arrives. 16 billion lives are at stake. General Talos turned to Arya. Specialist Chen, would you be willing to adapt your algorithm for immediate deployment? We could transmit it to the defenders at Centauri. Arya nodded without hesitation. Yes, sir, but the transmission method is crucial. We would need specialized drones that can broadcast the chaotic interference directly into the Krell fleet. The Centauri Defense Force has prototype transmitter drones, a green-skinned officer mentioned. They were developed for deep space reconnaissance but could be reprogrammed. Admiral Zorvo's tentacles moved with urgency. Make it happen. Specialist Chen will work with our best engineers to adapt her algorithm. The next 4 hours were the most intense of Arya's life. She worked alongside engineers from 6 different species, modifying her algorithm for deployment on the transmitter drones. The team moved with incredible speed, driven by the knowledge that billions of lives depended on their success. During a brief break, Commander Drav entered the engineering lab. The Vargon officer looked uncomfortable, his 4 eyes avoiding direct contact with Arya. Specialist Chen, he said formally. I came to offer my apologies. Arya looked up from her work, surprised. I judged you unfairly, Drav continued. I allowed my prejudice against humans to blind me to your abilities. This was unworthy of an officer. Thank you, Commander, Arya replied. But we don't have time for apologies now. We need to focus on saving Centauri Outpost. Drav nodded. My team requests permission to assist you. Lieutenant Kor has experience with drone programming and Mina's telepathic abilities could help identify potential flaws in the system. We could use the help, Arya admitted. Working together, the team completed the modifications in record time. The algorithm was packaged and transmitted to Centauri Outpost along with detailed deployment instructions. 2 hours later, the Strategic Command Center received word that the drones were ready. All that remained was to wait for the Krell attack. 3. Atmosphere in the command center was tense as officers gathered around the main display. The Krell fleet had been detected exiting hyperspace near Centauri Outpost. 5,000 warships against the outpost's defensive fleet of barely 300. The drones are in position, reported a communications officer, standing by to activate on the commander's order. Admiral Zorvo turned to Arya. Specialist Chen, this is your strategy. You should give the order. Arya swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility. If she was wrong, billions would die. If she was right, a century of war might end today. Activate the drones, she ordered, her voice steady despite her nerves. On the display, small dots representing the transmitter drones moved toward the massive Krell fleet. The drones began broadcasting Arya's chaotic interference pattern directly into the Krell communication network. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Krell ships continued their advance in perfect formation. Arya felt her heart sink. Had she miscalculated? Then, almost exactly 2 minutes after activation, a single Krell ship broke formation. It was a small deviation, barely noticeable. But to everyone watching, it was like seeing the first crack in an impenetrable wall. "It's working," whispered Mina, who had joined them in the command center. Just like in the simulation, more ships began showing signs of disruption, weapons fired off target, defensive shields activated at wrong times. The perfect coordination that made the Krell so deadly was beginning to unravel. 5 minutes after, the drones activated. 2 minutes faster than in the simulation, the entire Krell fleet was in disarray. Status report from Centauri Defense Force called out a communications officer. "The Krell ships are unable to coordinate their attack. Our forces are engaging successfully with minimal casualties." A cheer erupted in the command center. Officers embraced each other, some weeping with relief. Admiral Zorvo's tentacles waved with excitement. "Specialist Chen, you've done it. The Krell's greatest advantage has been neutralized." General Talos approached Arya, his silver face solemn. "In one day, you've accomplished what our best minds couldn't do in 100 years. He placed a formal medal on her uniform. "The Alliance owes you a debt that can never be repaid." As Arya watched the display showing the Krell fleet's continuing confusion, she thought about how quickly everything had changed. 7 minutes in a simulation had led to this moment, the potential end of a century-long war. "They're transmitting something," a communications officer suddenly announced. "The Krell Supreme Commander is requesting direct communication." The room fell silent again. The Krell had never initiated communication before. Admiral Zorvo looked at Arya, then at the assembled command staff. "It seems they want to talk. Perhaps for the first time in 100 years they realize they cannot win through force alone." "Put them through," ordered General Talos. "Let's hear what they have to say." The Strategic Command Center fell completely silent as the communication screen activated. For the first time in recorded history, an Alliance military facility was about to have direct contact with the Krell Supreme Commander. The screen flickered, then revealed a figure that made even the bravest officers step back. The Krell Supreme Commander was massive, with iridescent black armor covering a body that seemed more machine than organic. Multiple glowing red sensors served as eyes, scanning the room methodically. "I demand to know," the Krell Commander's voice boomed through the speakers, "who is responsible for this interference?" Admiral Zorvo stepped forward, his tentacles steady despite the tension. "This is Admiral Zorvo of the Galactic Alliance. We are prepared to discuss terms of surrender." "Not your surrender," the Krell commander replied. "The Krell Dominion does not surrender. I demand to know the identity of the mind behind this attack on our communication systems." General Talos exchanged glances with Admiral Zorvo before nodding. Slightly. There was no point hiding the truth. Specialist Arya Chen developed the countermeasure, Admiral Zorvo stated. "A cadet from Earth." The Krell commander's sensors focused, adjusting as if trying to locate Arya in the crowd of officers. "Earth? The primitive world that joined the Alliance only 50 years ago? Impossible." Arya stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "It's true. I developed the algorithm that disrupted your quantum network." The massive figure on the screen was motionless for several seconds, processing this information. "Show yourself clearly, human." Arya moved to stand directly before the communication screen. The Krell commander's sensors focused on her, scanning her from head to toe. "You are small," the Krell stated, almost sounding confused. "Your species is physically weak. Your technology is centuries behind most Alliance races." "Sometimes that's an advantage," Arya replied. "We approach the problem differently because our technological development followed a different path." "Okay," Krell commander was silent again, processing. When it spoke next, the tone had changed subtly. "The Krell Dominion has never encountered an enemy capable of disrupting our battle networks. Our greatest strength has become our greatest vulnerability." Admiral Zorvo moved to stand beside Arya. "We are prepared to discuss terms for ending this conflict. The attack on Centauri outpost has been neutralized. Further aggression would be futile as we can now deploy this countermeasure throughout Alliance space." "I must consult with the Dominion Council," the Krell commander replied. We require 6 hours. Granted, Admiral Zorvo agreed. We will maintain our defensive positions but will not initiate further attacks during this period. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Did that just happen? One of the junior officers whispered. Are the Krell actually considering peace talks? General Talos turned to address the room. Regardless of their decision, today marks a historic turning point. For the first time, we have a true tactical advantage against the Krell. Admiral Zorvo's tentacles moved in a gesture of agreement. We must prepare for either outcome. If they choose peace, we need negotiation teams ready. If they choose to continue fighting, we must deploy Specialist Chen's countermeasure to all Alliance fleets immediately. The next 6 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Arya worked with the Alliance's best engineers and programmers to prepare her algorithm for wide distribution. Teams of communication specialists prepared secure channels to transmit the program to every Alliance military outpost. Meanwhile, word of what had happened spread throughout the academy. Cadets and instructors gathered outside the command center, eager for news. The story of how a human cadet had potentially ended a century-long war was already becoming legend. Commander Drav and his team helped with the preparations, working alongside Arya with newfound respect. Lieutenant Kor, who had openly mocked her earlier, now diligently programmed transmitter drones based on her specifications. I still don't understand how you saw what no one else did, Mina said during a brief break. The Xylene tactician had been helping optimize the deployment strategy for the countermeasure. Humans have a saying, Arya replied. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Everyone was so focused on matching the Krell's advanced technology that they didn't consider simpler alternatives. Your species has much to teach us, Mina admitted. We've always seen humans as latecomers to the galactic community, with little to contribute. We were wrong. As the 6-hour deadline approached, tension built in the command center. Would the Krell choose peace, or would they continue a war they now seemed likely to lose? With 2 minutes remaining, the communication system activated. The Krell Supreme Commander appeared on screen once more. The Dominion Council has reached a decision, the commander announced without preamble. We propose an immediate cessation of hostilities and the establishment of neutral zones between Krell and Alliance territories. The relief in the command center was palpable. Officers embraced, some openly weeping. A century of war that had claimed billions of lives was potentially ending. We accept your proposal in principle, Admiral Zorvo replied formally. Detailed negotiations will be required, but we welcome this first step toward peace. The Krell commander's sensors focused on Arya once more. The human cadet will participate in these negotiations. We wish to understand this different perspective that defeated our undefeated strategy. Arya was stunned. Me? I'm just a cadet, not a diplomat. You are the architect of our first defeat in a century, the Krell commander stated. Your mind is valuable. The Dominion Council insists on your participation. After the communication ended, Admiral Zorvo placed a gentle tentacle on Arya's shoulder. This is unprecedented, Specialist Chen. The Krell have never shown interest in individual Alliance members before. General Talos nodded in agreement. They respect strength above all else. By defeating their battle network, you've earned their attention in a way no diplomat ever could. News of the ceasefire spread quickly throughout Alliance space. On thousands of worlds, celebrations began as people dared to hope for real peace for the first time in generations. At the academy, Arya suddenly found herself the center of attention. Cadets who had previously ignored or dismissed her now looked at her with awe. Instructors who had treated her as just another student now asked for her insights. Commander Drav approached her as preparations for the peace negotiations began. Specialist Chen, he said formally, I have submitted an official commendation for your personnel file. Your actions today exemplify the highest ideals of the Alliance military. Thank you, Commander, Arya replied. But I was just doing my duty. You did what none of us could see, Drav insisted. You changed everything in 7 minutes. As Arya prepared for her unexpected role in the peace negotiations, she received a message from Earth. The Alliance representatives from her home planet had sent a simple but meaningful communication. Earth stands proud. You have shown the galaxy what humans can contribute. 7 minutes had changed a century of war. 7 minutes had changed Arya's life. And 7 minutes had changed humanity's place in the galactic community forever. 3 weeks had passed since the historic ceasefire between the Galactic Alliance and the Krell Dominion. The peace negotiations were taking place on a neutral space station, positioned exactly halfway between Alliance and Krell territories. Representatives from both sides had been working tirelessly to draft a treaty that would formally end the 100-year war. Arya sat at the massive negotiation table, still somewhat uncomfortable with her role. Around her sat the most important diplomats and military leaders from across the galaxy. Despite her new rank of lieutenant, a field promotion unprecedented for a cadet, she felt out of place among such distinguished figures. Yet the Krell negotiators focused primarily on her. Their fascination with the human who had defeated their undefeatable battle network had not diminished. The lead Krell negotiator, Sub-Commander Vex, often directed questions specifically to her. The human perspective continues to intrigue us, Vex stated during that day's session. Your species approached the problem in a way none of our analysts predicted. Humans are adaptable, Arya explained. We've had to be. Our planet has extreme environmental variation, and our history is filled with challenges that forced us to think creatively. Admiral Zorvo, who had been mentoring Arya through the negotiation process, nodded in agreement. The Alliance has always valued diversity, but perhaps we haven't fully appreciated what newer member species bring to our community. The negotiations continued for hours, discussing border agreements, prisoner exchanges, and security protocols. Arya's input was particularly valuable when discussing how to prevent future communication disruptions on both sides. The Krell, remarkably, seemed genuinely interested in learning from their defeat rather than seeking revenge. As the day's session concluded, Sub-Commander Vex approached Arya privately. The Krell officer towered over her, mechanical limbs whirring softly with each movement. Lieutenant Chen, the Supreme Commander requests a private audience with you before the final treaty signing tomorrow. Arya glanced at Admiral Zorvo, who looked surprised but nodded his approval. I would be honored, she replied. The next morning, Arya was escorted to a secure chamber in the neutral zone of the space station. The room was massive, designed to accommodate the Krell Supreme Commander's considerable size. When she entered, the imposing figure was already waiting. Lieutenant Chen, the commander's synthetic voice echoed in the chamber. You have changed the course of galactic history. That wasn't my intention, Commander, Arya replied honestly. I was just trying to solve a problem that seemed solvable. This is what fascinates us about humans, the commander said. Your species lacks the physical strength of the Vargon, the telepathic abilities of the Xylene, or the engineering instincts of the Dranasi. Yet you see connections that others miss. The commander moved closer, multiple sensors focusing on her. For a century, the Krell Dominion believed our technological superiority made us invincible. We based our entire military doctrine on perfect coordination through our quantum network. You exposed a fundamental flaw in our thinking. Any system can be vulnerable if it relies too heavily on a single approach, Arya observed. Precisely. This is why I requested this meeting. The Supreme Commander activated a holographic display showing star maps of both Alliance and Krell territories. The treaty will be signed today, ending formal hostilities. But I wish to tell you personally, you have earned the respect of the Krell Dominion. Thank you, Commander, that means a great deal. The Krell do not forget, the Commander continued. We record everything. Your name will be entered in our historical archives as the being who ended the long war. Future generations of Krell will study your strategy. The magnitude of this honor wasn't lost on Arya. For a species as proud as the Krell to acknowledge defeat and study the methods of their opponent was unprecedented. Later that day, representatives from both the Alliance and the Krell Dominion gathered in the station's Grand Hall for the treaty signing. Thousands of media channels broadcast the historic event to trillions of beings across the galaxy. As Admiral Zorvo and the Krell Supreme Commander signed the document that formally ended the 100-Year War, Arya stood among the Alliance delegation, still somewhat amazed by how quickly everything had changed. Commander Drav, now assigned as a security officer for the negotiation team, stood nearby. "When you joined my simulation team 3 weeks ago, I thought you were worthless," he said quietly. "I have never been so pleased to be proven wrong." Arya smiled. "We all have different strengths to contribute. That's what makes the Alliance strong." After the ceremony, a celebration began. Representatives from hundreds of worlds mingled, many meeting their former enemies for the first time without hostility. The relief was palpable. Generations had been born and died knowing only war, and now peace was finally a reality. "Admiral." Zorvo found Arya standing alone, watching the festivities. "Enjoying the historic moment, Lieutenant?" "Still processing it all, sir," she admitted. 3 weeks ago I was just a cadet that no one took seriously. And now you're the most famous human in the galaxy," the Admiral said. "Earth's representative has informed me that your home planet is preparing quite a celebration for your return. You've changed humanity's standing in the Alliance forever." "I just applied what I knew," Arya said modestly. "That's exactly the point," Zorvo replied, his tentacles moving in a gesture of emphasis. "Each species brings unique perspectives and approaches. The Krell believed their advanced technology made them superior, but they failed to value diversity of thought. The Alliance must not make the same mistake." As if to underscore his point, Lieutenant Kor approached with Mina. The Vargan warrior, who had once mocked Arya, now treated her with profound respect. "Lieutenant Chen, the Academy Commandant has ordered a complete revision of our tactical training programs," Kor informed her. "All cadets will now study what they're calling the Chen Principle, looking for simple solutions to complex problems." Mina nodded. "They're also creating a new position, cross-species strategic innovation. They want you to lead it after your Earth homecoming tour." Arya was speechless. In a matter of weeks, she had gone from being ignored to having a principal named after her and being offered a leadership position. As the celebration continued, news came in from across the galaxy. Worlds that had been under Krell occupation for decades were seeing the withdrawal of enemy forces. Refugee populations that had fled their home planets were preparing to return. Shipyards that had been building warships for a century were being converted to produce exploration vessels and science stations. The long war was truly over. That evening, Arya stood at a viewport looking out at the stars. A small delegation approached, an engineer from Earth who had been working on the space station. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, saluting. "The Earth delegation asked me to give you this." He handed her a small communication device. When activated, it displayed a message from the leaders of her home planet. "Lieutenant Arya Chen, in 7 minutes you accomplished what the galaxy couldn't do in 100 years. You've shown that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, but our unique way of thinking. Earth stands taller among the stars because of you." Arya closed the message, feeling a mix of pride and humility. As she continued looking out at the stars, she reflected on how quickly everything had changed. The cadets had laughed at her. 7 minutes later, the war was over, and the galaxy would never be the same again.